My name is Blue Newstifter. My pronouns are she and her. I am a statistician, a board game designer, a writer, and a trans activist. I live with my spouse and one of their other partners in a triad home. I have loved board games for decades. When I was a kid, I used to set up Monopoly and play several persons all by myself. Each of them had their own personality. And when I was in grad school, my partner, Ruthie, my spouse, encouraged me to get into a gaming group because doing grad school is really stressful and I needed something else to do. And from there, our collection grew very quickly as I got addicted. And then a friend of mine who has already published a board game, we both love this one cooperative board game about firefighters. And we just sort of started brainstorming, what would make this game more interesting and fun for us? And then we came to the company that makes that board game and asked if they wanted an expansion to it. And they said yes. And the Kickstarter was last year, and the game just published beginning of 2018. My journey towards my gender has been an intensely long one, full of baby steps. I, now looking back, can see hints of it throughout my life, but at the time, a lot of them I didn't recognize for what they were. In my teens and 20s, I identified as a cross-dresser because I didn't really have words for what I was. I found the idea of being a trans woman really intimidating, and I grew up in Indiana. I grew up in a city with over 200 churches as its claim to fame. I did not get a lot of exposure to trans identities and to the variety of trans identities. My exposure to what transness meant was movies like Trans America or Boys Don't Cry. What it meant to me to be a trans person was to be sad, essentially. All these movies are about people who are depressed, and transitioning is basically their only alternative to suicide. And I didn't feel suicidal, so I guessed that transness was not me. But I did have an affinity for femininity, and I didn't know how else to parse that other than to call myself a crossdresser, because that was the only alternative I had. And this was something I struggled with for quite a while. In my late 20s, I think when I was 29, I finally discovered the term non-binary from Tumblr. And my spouse came out as non-binary to me, and then about 3 months later I was like, oh, I think this is me too. And I struggled with it a lot. I struggled with feeling like I was appropriating transness in some way, that I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't trans enough. So I came out as non-binary. I said my pronouns were they, them, and I thought that that would be enough. Things kept feeling worse instead of better. I felt like I'd found this little piece of myself, but I wasn't finding ways to get it recognized. No one else would get my pronouns right. It felt dangerous to be wearing dresses, and when I did, I got weird looks or harassment. And I would get offended when people treated me as a cross-dresser, even though that was what I had identified for many years. In my 30s, I started seeing a therapist, a non-binary therapist, who in an early session asked if I had dysphoria. And I said, no, I don't have dysphoria. I mean, I wish I had breasts and curvier hips and different genitals, but that's not dysphoria. And my therapist was like, you've just named 3 very specific dysphoria sites. It felt like I was doomed. It felt like, to me, I had all this internalized transphobia about transness being this near-death sentence. And at some point, I joined Twitter and started following a whole bunch of really amazing trans feminine people who were leading normal lives. They were computer game programmers, they were producers, they lived in polyamorous triads in California, as you do. I came to realize that you could be trans and happy, and in fact be really cool. And these people, I looked at before pictures and transition timelines, and those pictures looked like me. And the people that were the after pictures were beautiful and everything that I wanted to be. And I realized that being trans didn't have to be an ending. It could be the beginning. So after a couple of years of intense struggle with myself about, again, being trans enough, if this was right for me, was I brave enough to do these things? I cried onto my spouse, Ruthie, and told them that I thought I needed to start estrogen. And they said that they had been kind of waiting for me to come to that. My first dose, actually I didn't feel a lot when I took my first dose, but I felt a lot when I got the prescription. Even going into HRT, I still struggled a lot with anxiety, and with feeling like maybe I'm making this up, maybe this is not the actual thing that I need, and I'm just looking for a placebo to make me feel better. And part of the way I convinced myself to start HRT was looking at all the ways that it was reversible if I decided in the first 6 months that I didn't like it. The day that the doctor gave me my prescription, I sat down in the car in the parking lot of the doctor's office and cried. And I basically cried all the way to the pharmacy. It was not a sad crying, it was relief. It was the knowledge and the sudden feeling that I had been living through life with a 1-ton weight on my chest, and that weight had just been pushed off just a tiny bit, and I realized what it felt like to breathe. I've dealt with some external transphobia. Ironically, or not ironically, the worst was from a queer group. I was part of an LGBT chorus on the board of directors, and it was going fine until I spoke up about a concert that we were doing in conjunction with the police, and I suggested that that was maybe not respectful of queer people of color. In particular, this was less than 8 months after Black Lives Matter had protested Toronto Pride in order to get better recognition for Black queer people and to try to remove uniformed police from the Toronto Pride. And I thought that by doing something in conjunction with the police, we were kind of spitting in the face of our queer people of color. The resistance I faced was quite harsh, including one of the founders of the queer chorus started referring to me as it in emails. And refusing to use my name or using it in quotation marks. So I got him suspended from his own organization, but the transphobia I faced from the rest of the chorus continued until I quit. Before I started hormones, just after I started identifying as non-binary, I had a partner at the time who we were lying in bed together talking, and I told them that I never felt like the protagonist of my own story. I just felt like a supporting character in everybody else's. And they looked really sad, and I tried to convince them that no, I was fine with it. I know my place in the world, and it's fine. Now I feel like a protagonist. Now I have a story of my own. Now I have a life. Now my story has a plot to it instead of just a bunch of random things that happen that I can't piece together. Life can be harder sometimes as a trans person in the objective ways, when facing discrimination, having to deal with misgendering on a daily basis, when that was a thing that happened to me more. But I will tell you that facing a hard life as yourself is so much easier than facing an easy life as someone who doesn't feel like anybody. You know yourself better than anybody else does, and no one else can tell you who you are or what your gender is or how your life should look. Only you know that. And it's okay if you don't know all the details right now. And it's okay if it doesn't fit any scripts that you've seen before. You can piece together a patchwork gender and a patchwork life out of bits of all the stories that you've seen. But this is your only life, and this is your body, and this is your identity, and they deserve to feel like home. So you should make them a home that you want to live in.